Hello. Good morning. I think it's good morning. I am like in this vortex, but welcome to another episode of the Event Hustler Show. I love this opportunity to kind of catch up with industry superstars. And KiKi and I were just chatting before going live. Like always, it's like the good stuff always just we get right into it. But thank you, KiKi L'Italien from Association Chat for joining us today. Um, First of all, hi. Hello.
Hi. Hi. How are you? Oh my gosh. I'm so excited to
I
be here.
know. It has been so long since we've really caught up. You and I actually, I guess we were doing a call with Event Moby not too long ago,
Mhm,
maybe a month ago or something. But
mhm.
I love the Event Hustler Show because it gives me a chance to just 30 minutes of we're
Yeah.
catching up. And I like it. The reason I started the podcast was because we have all these conversations. And when they're over, even if they're just catch ups, you're like, man, I wish other people heard that because inevitably we get into all these crazy things like we just did in the last 5 minutes.
Well, I know if they'd only heard the last 5 minutes, it's
I
like the
know, that's how it
killer
always is.
killer last 5 minutes, but, no, it's always good to talk to you. We've been friends and peers in this crazy, sort of events world and association world for a long time, and so I know that, whenever we get a chance to talk, it's always interesting to find out your take and to find out, kind of what we're both observing in this space because there are always so many things that are happening. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here. Glad to have this chance to catch up.
Yeah, I feel like the industry always moves very fast, but especially the last few years, it feels like it's just at lightning speed. And I always love chatting with you. One of the reasons is because you talk to so many other people through association chat and your podcast and all the events that you do. You're constantly kind of out there hearing, and I try to do the same. So I feel like then when you and I get together, it's kind of like, I heard this is what's happening. It's almost like you can feel the underground moving a little bit and you can see where things are going because you just
Yes.
talk to enough people that you can see, okay, well, this organization's dealing with this, but they're like the only ones who care about that. Everyone else is talking about this other thing
Yeah.
that's kind of rumbling under. So I think it's a
Yeah.
good chance to just kind of catch up. But before we dive into all of that, I just want to ask you, how are you doing? Because the world is a crazy place. And I feel like we don't stop enough to really ask each other that question meaningfully.
Well, and we were just talking right before we went live. I really do feel like that story I was sharing with you. My husband tells me the other day about the parachuting spiders that are about to infest the east
Yes.
coast of the United States, and my first question wasn't like, "What parachuting spiders?" or "What is that about?" My first question was, "Are they poisonous?" Because I mean, these days we have been dealing with for the past 2 years the pandemic. We have been which who would have guessed, right? So
Yeah.
somebody used the word unprecedented for talking about what we're dealing with seeing Russia invade Ukraine, and the way that how it's impacting everything from trade to communications, and the impact that it's having on what does it mean when we live in a world where our tech companies have so much control that it can influence the way that military communications are happening in countries, and what does that mean for our association leaders? And then we look at of course, the climate change stuff, which is also something that is so huge that it's well, I mean, it's paralyzed a lot of us into thinking that there's nothing that we can do, or it's a
Yeah.
limited amount that we can do without each other. And so, yeah, how am I doing? I'm doing about as well as like all of that would add up to letting anyone that's still a relatively sound mind say that they're doing fine. I mean,
Right.
you know, my
I
day
have
to
a
day is
friend.
pretty good.
I have a friend. I always text her. I'm like, "Hey, how are you?" She's like, as good as you can be. How are you? And I say the same thing. It's like how we start every conversation for the last 2 years. It's like we're surviving. There's nothing that's, I mean, there are
Yeah.
great things that happen. It's not like the whole world is falling apart. Um, but yeah, it's just I think that comment you made about climate change making people feel kind of like stuck. It's something
Yeah.
that's such a huge issue that it almost is like paralyzing. But I feel like there's so many huge issues that is paralyzing in and of itself as well. It's kind of like, talking about Russia and Ukraine, I hear a lot of kind of like, it's just, I can't even talk about it because there's just so many other things in my head, and it becomes overwhelming. And then, we're here talking about associations and how can you grow? It sounds, but I think there is so much overlap between all these things that
There
are
is.
happening in the world and what people need to be thinking about, even though it can be really overwhelming to keep pushing innovative ideas. You're just trying to
Yeah.
survive.
Well, and I saw someone, that's just it. We're all trying to do the best we can. We're all trying to survive. And I think that because of all of the time that we found ourselves sort of in reflection, self-reflection mode over the past few years, because of the pandemic, I think we're arriving at different answers and solutions about what that looks like how we're doing and what we want to do and how we want to interact with the world when it's presenting so many different problems to us at the same
Yeah.
time. We're probably responding to those in a different way than we would have if we hadn't just gone through so much with the pandemic and forcing us to look at things in new ways and to understand the gravity of a lot of it in very real life terms. And so I think that because of that, I'm reminded of something that Rupert Reed said. He is somebody who talks a lot. I talk a lot about climate change because in the midst of all of like war and all of this other stuff, that's something that's going on in the background that is also this huge thing that's starting to impact us on a day-to-day basis, no matter where we are in the world. And he said he lives in that whole focused spot, and he went through this really deep depression thinking, well, what's the point? We've really crossed this threshold. What's the point? And he arrived at trying to figure out where to find the beauty in the life that we have day to day. And it's almost like if we can if we can bear it to get past the pain that people are going through right now, if we can bear it to try to see the positive is that we all already have this limited time on earth. And so maybe the poignancy of seeing the danger that so many people are in right now is pointing us in the direction of making better decisions. I would like to think so,
Yeah.
based on our values. So,
And it's on us to do that. I think it's
yeah.
easy for us to look at a topic like climate change and to feel like, oh, there's just so much. But I think it is our responsibility to think individually about what can I do? What are the
Yeah.
things, even if it's not going to change the tide. But if we all just kind of say, well, there's nothing that we can do, then there will be no change, and I think we
Yeah.
all have to see that the whole world's going to make the same changes at the same time. We're going to watch it. But I think that's not just about climate change, but even in the pandemic, it's kind of like figuring out, what are you comfortable with? What is your life going to look like, despite the fact that it looks very different than it used to look with all the restrictions and things? And how do you
Yes.
find like your own joy and contribute to the world in the most meaningful way that you can, and to your work, without being totally overwhelmed by all of that? I think that's a huge challenge that I know I'm trying to put myself through. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people are thinking about that.
Well, I think so too. And I was just now looking for something because I couldn't find it. So there was something that I read the other day as I was doom scrolling, and the person said, I said to my wife, I'm so sorry for, you know, bringing a child into this world that is so full of all of these horrible things. And she quoted him something, so I'm going to have to paraphrase somebody
Sure.
quoting something, but she said, never apologize for giving birth to dragon slayers in a time of dragons. And I
Mm,
think that's powerful. Like, instead of being like, oh, I'm so sorry, maybe
absolutely.
in all of our decisions, we're here now, and we have, I have a child, you have children, and it's like, let's think about what we can do with what we have, and to try to, raise our dragon slayers, that are going to
Yeah,
be able to slay
absolutely.
these dragons.
Yeah. Now, as it relates to associations and kind of the work that I know you do and so many people do, or just event industry people, right? Like there's so many, just like we're talking about climate change and war and pandemic,
Mhm.
obviously all of those things impact the work that we do as event professionals, but we have on top of that lots of added challenges
Yeah.
just as an industry. Um, what advice do you have for people who say, I would love to be that dragon slayer. I'd love to make a difference in the world and in my work. I just don't know where to start. It's overwhelming.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So like, and this is something that I see people facing all the time, because they're dealing with, ultimately, these relationships that are either on their boards or as part of their memberships or within their staff. And, one thing we know for sure is that when you live in uncertain times, you have trust issues that you're going to run into, you have relationship issues. People are trying to suss out who they can actually trust and who they can communicate with and build things with. Our associations have this huge responsibility, and this great opportunity to be able to do so much, because they represent these swaths of science, or
Yeah.
health areas, industry, tech areas, and it's like these huge swaths of people. So there are these really great opportunities, but what's happening is that our leaders are running into everything from, issues with culture on the work in the workplace, because everyone's had these remote working situations, and they're saying, I want something different. They're
Yeah.
trying to figure out what that power dynamic is on staff. They're trying to figure out what their members need that's different than what they needed before. Ultimately, I think what needs to happen is that I think some of the smartest leaders that I am, fortunate to be talking with, they're making decisions about how to really double down on what makes them not just relevant, but makes them important, really important.
Mm.
Because there's relevance, which is like sort of the bare minimum you need to cross. And then there's like, what's actually something that compels people to want to act and do and be a part of. And so they are focusing on that relationship cultivation and making their organizations and their relationships the number one thing that they're focused on. And so, in a time when we have so much technology that's like sort of taking care of all of these different pieces of the relationship, which is great for streamlining, they're looking at, well, how do I make sure that each of these individuals, sometimes individuals representing companies, understand that they mean something to me and to the organization and to each other. And those individuals, those leaders who are figuring out that they need to cultivate those relationships, and they're really trying to figure out how to make that matter more, um, they're finding greater success, because they're able to have the important communications, the important conversations that allow them to grow and move in a direction in which they need to move.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things that I hoped would come out of the pandemic is, everything gets taken away from you in terms of, going out and the lifestyle that you used to live, and everyone's working from home. They're spending more time with the family. And I have experienced countless conversations in and outside the industry of people who are saying that gave me just enough breathing room to think that I don't like the way things were working.
Right.
Technology is great, but to your point, it only manages so much of the relationship. At some point,
Yeah.
a relationship is about two human beings who are
Yes.
connected, and that impacts what we want to do with social media and how we view that, with our association management technologies, but also this drive towards humans connecting with each other, and kind of underlying all of that, you see all these bigger issues like climate change and things happening in the world, maybe it's super optimistic of me, but I feel like this is where the change happens, is when people kind of dial back from all of that technology. And obviously, you and I are both big fans of tech,
Yeah.
but it's about the human connections and learning. I don't know if you saw in the TechSYTALK community, but I was posting about these employers who are doing stay interviews. Because to your
Mhm.
point,
Mhm.
everyone's leaving, and so the employers are looking at their top performers and say, "What can we do to make you stay here? What is
Yeah.
it that will attract you?" And I think associations and organizations should all be doing this. We're doing it with our Texie Talk community, just asking people, "Tell me what makes you feel like there's value? What is?" I bet we're doing a ton of stuff that our members don't care about. They just
Yeah. I
sound
mean
good on paper. Um, so that's got to be a huge challenge, especially for these international associations who have people from all over the world, where things are impacting everyone differently. Although obviously things like pandemic affect globally, but certainly
Yeah.
not the same way.
Well, and I'm seeing that in the association chat community too, as people are trying to decide whether they renew memberships to like industry organization associations and stuff. They're trying to figure out what is the value for me there? What has it been? Is it still the same? What's changed? And it's been illuminating for me, because I think these are the questions we always want to be asking and we always should be asking. But it really has now, it's become a time where it's not just, yes, the money part is important, but it's not just that. It's people saying, I'm really trying to narrow down, like I'm trying to make my life more meaningful.
Yeah.
And I'm really trying to eliminate the stuff that is not adding directly to it. Is this still, does this still have the value that it used to? And you want your members, or whether it's a group, an online group, your association, you want your members to be like, oh, absolutely. I get so much, I have to be a part of that. I can't even imagine not being a member. And if they ask that question and they're really, really struggling with it, even if they eventually come to the idea that, yeah, they're going to go ahead and renew, boy, you better be thinking about like, like
Yeah,
how do
exactly.
we make that an easier yes next time? Because if
Yeah.
that's that excruciating, then there's something wrong.
Are
Or
you
that's
seeing
just a different organization than what that person needs.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're not gonna be the right fit for every member, but are
Yeah.
you seeing any trends in terms of what members are looking for, what they find valuable, and what they're saying like, "Okay, I've been paying all these years for X, but it's just
Yes.
either it's suddenly not as meaningful to me, or I just haven't taken the time to think about it, and now that I think about it, what am I doing?"
Yeah, yeah. So one of the big things that's been coming up, and this is the sort of dichotomy that I'm like struggling with myself, and I think a lot of us are, is the role that events play in helping to bring people together, for that networking,
Yeah,
community building, relationship building, and all of that. And that's such a huge part of what an association does, having that community that's part of the value proposition that makes an association unique. And it being able to build those relationships, also very, very important. When the pandemic happened, and of course everyone, and I say everyone, but like most of us had to shelter in place. We couldn't get
mhm,
together as easily, and now we're still grappling with what regional rules are. We're in a moment right now, just for future posterity. So if anybody's watching this later, in this exact moment, things are opening up around the US. In the meantime, we're seeing in Europe where they opened everything up and now cases
yeah,
are rising again. So,
yeah,
but for this moment,
for now.
we're going into summer. And for many of us in the United States, there's this feeling of hope and wow. My daughter just went to her first day of class where she was able to see everyone, including her teachers' faces for the
Mhm,
first time yesterday. So going without the mask. And whether we we see a return to the masks and all of the regulations and stuff. People are so fatigued with that. It doesn't even really matter in a way, because
Right.
the questions we have to answer about that, what we saw is a real shakedown of value proposition for associations during that time. If we can't get together, how are we connecting our people?
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. And if there wasn't a good solution for that, and I'm not just talking about events, for associations, if I were an association, executive director, I would be saying, not just what happens if this happens again, but looking over at what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. What's the future hold in like 10 years if our tech companies can decide to either make the internet work for us or not? What does
Right.
that mean? And so, if we suddenly lost the ability to communicate in the number one way that we do, to bring people together, and our primary role is to bring people together, I think that you have to start asking yourself questions about, how do we do that if the thing I rely on the most doesn't work? When
Yeah.
Google goes down for a second, or it goes down for half a day. I remember
Yeah.
several months ago, it's like my Google Calendar doesn't work. I have no idea what my life is anymore. And it's like, okay, so we need to figure out the plan B, you know?
Exactly. And there's been such
Um,
a push, especially over the last 2 years, to digitize everything. Okay, well, we
yeah,
can't get together in person because of COVID rules. So let's get everyone online and let's build these
right,
online communities. And certainly, I think there's obviously value in that. We're not talking about a world, I think, in 10 years where technology doesn't exist.
right.
But to your point, really thinking about what are the backup plans, but also those backup plans being really important right now because
Very important.
people want to see face. I would love to see you face to
I
face and
know.
have, like, actual drink instead of just seeing each other on StreamYard all the time for years. So
Yes,
I think that piece is really important for associations to cultivate regardless, and really for everyone to cultivate regardless of what's gonna like you said, we can't
totally.
predict the future, but
Yeah.
we
I
can
mean,
start to
I'm
see
looking.
what's happening.
Yeah, I'm sure, and you're probably seeing this too. Like, things, because things are opening up, I have more and more, like, I can start to think of myself as a speaker who travels again, because like I'm starting to get the
Yeah.
invitations coming into things again, and which is very strange, because I've gone for years now, a couple of years, where it was like I didn't have to start coordinating that, and now I'm like, ooh, how do I get from this engagement to this one? Uh,
Yep.
Fun, and also, like, I'm not sure I want to build it back into the direction it was in before, but what that tells me is that, yes, of course, we want to get together, we want to see each other face to face, but when we're face to face, some of these in-person meetings that I've been going to, there's also a high expectation of making the absolute most of when you're with other people. Like, oh my gosh, if you're not making the absolute most of that time together, or if your rules are preventing people from connecting more, there's a lot of pushback and feedback from folks, attendees, participants. And so, yeah, you need a plan B. You also need a plan C. I mean, if you don't have the ability to mail people directly, and which is a bigger issue with remote workforce being what it is today, if you don't have the ability to reach out in like a couple of different ways, then you should get to work on that, I think, because
Yeah.
we cannot rely on just one avenue all the time.
And I mean, this is a pretty big question, deep question, but you mentioned a little bit earlier about technology and their access to just their power, but also their access to information. And
Mhm,
I know in New
mhm.
York yesterday, the senators were rolling out just heads up, we're going to be targeted for more and more cyber attacks. And so everyone should change their passwords. And they're kind of, it was just on the net, the news.
Yeah,
Um, and I think this is another thing organizations have to think a lot about is now you're going to collect even more information potentially about your members, mailing addresses and things
absolutely.
like that. And,
Yeah.
and what are you seeing in terms of that, in terms
Oh
of
my
what
gosh.
associations are doing or need to do?
Well, if you remember going back pre-pandemic, GDPR was like the big
Yeah.
everything. And now, and it still is, right? Like it's even more
Sure.
so now. But of course, we're all exhausted. We don't even want to remember what that's all about.
Yeah.
All of these privacy rules, all of these, and increasingly with the remote workforce, because they have different technology and different ways that they're handling LastPass, our data hygiene and the rules that we live by in the way that we interact with our information are becoming more and more important. So companies like Delcor that do things like go in and manage your IT for you. I mean, that's just one thing that they do,
Sure.
but like they're facing those types of issues because there are more and more people who are working from home. And so how do you ensure the safety and sanctity of your members' information when your company or your not company, your association, organization as a whole is liable? Board members, you're liable too, right? Like everyone is responsible for ensuring that these members have their information in a safe place. And if you find out that it's not safe for any reason, you are on the hook to fix that. You have to fix it. And if you're in a situation where you're not paying attention to how that works, then you're probably just lining yourself up for a whole lot of hurt in the future. So
Yeah.
it's better to sort of take your medicine now than to try to wait and hope that you don't ever need it. But I mean, that's a huge issue. It's going to be a huger issue. And I think that more and more people are going to be hesitant to share their information. I mean, I know when I go on, I used to just sort of let everything autofill as I was going through, like, oh, yeah, what's my titles? And blah, blah, blah. And now I'm like, who's asking? What are you doing with this? And do I really want this information out there? Because it's like every day I get told about a data breach and I have to
Yeah.
change my passwords for something. And now I'm like, I don't know, maybe that PDF isn't worth it.
And that's
Maybe
really
that webinar is not worth it.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge for associations and other brands who rely on that for lead generation. And but I agree, you're not the only one, of course, who's thinking, I don't know, is it like really that question of is it valuable enough to me? I think is being asked by more people about more things now than it
Oh, yeah.
was
Yeah.
just even yesterday. It's like every
Yeah.
day you're questioning, do I want to give my information away? Do I want to participate? You talked about speaking. Do I want to rebuild my whole speaking business the way I had where I was traveling all over the world all the time? And now maybe I don't, what does
I
that look
don't.
like? Exactly.
Yeah, I don't. Big secret. I don't. I like speaking to people, but I mean, I had a lot of reflection, discovered that I appreciated more, and it was more lucrative for me to focus and stay in
Yeah.
one spot than it was for me to do all this travel and moving around. And so now it's like, well, I'll do some, but I don't want it to be at the level that it was before. And I also think that it's interesting to see what's happening in the small towns and stuff. I think
Mm.
the regional focus on community is also an interesting area to look at. I think it's
Yeah.
interesting for a lot of different reasons, but when I see what's happening in the small town I'm a part of, and then I recently went back to, after 10 years, revisited my hometown in Southwest Missouri. The growth that's happening in the small towns in that area as a result of more remote work, people being able to move back
Right.
and stuff like that. The small businesses that are growing, more life on main streets across the United States, and an uptick in interest in those regional civic organizations, those community driven civic organizations. That's
Yeah.
very interesting to me, and I think that associations you're probably paying a lot more attention at this point as an executive director or CEO of your association to what's going on with your chapters and regional groups. As a former chapter manager, I would say you probably should have been already, but
Yes, exactly.
but the strength is definitely there in people being able to get together regionally and connect in a way that is meaningful for them in their immediate surroundings. And so I think that's kind of a trend that I think is really important. So in figuring out how to stay better connected, I think that, that's one way that associations can have a more meaningful impact, is really looking at that localized presence.
Yeah, absolutely. My gosh, I just looked at the clock and realized it's been a half an hour already. How is
I
that?
know. We can
Like,
keep
oh,
going.
another
We can
question.
keep going. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to take your whole day, but what other things I didn't really get to ask nearly as many questions as I typically would, but in a good way, because we're talking about all these great things. Is there anything that's just when you were thinking about talking to me about associations that you wanted to mention and I have not asked you about, and you're like, please give me space to just
I think so. I was really trying to think of the what should associations be doing that's different. I think we really touched on it. If there was one thing that I think associations need to focus on, I would say those plan B, plan C type scenarios, and
yeah,
specifically in the way that you bring people together and that you communicate. Those are the number one priority in my mind as far as what you need to think of in terms of your responsibility for ensuring the future of your organization, because you can have all the strategy that you want, but if you can't communicate with your members or can't figure out how to bring them together, you're going to struggle. And so making sure that you have the plan B and C in place for how you bring your people together. And then the other thing is just, and I know that this is such a touchy feely sort of thing, but you really need to be thinking about that human to human connection in terms of how you're relating to your other leaders, your staff, your volunteer leaders, building those relationships on purpose. It doesn't seem like it's scalable, but that part doesn't matter as much as actually creating those meaningful relationships, because that's what you're going to have to rely on in order to have the trust to have the hard conversations to move your organization in the future. So those would be the two main things that I would want people to focus on.
yeah, it's so important. I think that human connection, and I think in general, I think we'll see this focus, as you said, on regional personal connections, a focus on the depth of relationships as compared to scale, like more people,
Yeah.
more, and I
Yeah.
think we're seeing that. We've talked about, in-person events becoming the luxury item because of that human
Yes.
connection, and really being able to charge more for your memberships and grow your association through less people, I think is something we're going to see as compared to just bigger, bigger, bigger. We have to have more people.
I'm all for that. I love the idea of having a very, like, when you do have that limited amount, it is a luxury to be able to know that you will not be able to attend these events without getting to know somehow most of the people there. That sounds to me like a premium kind of engagement, and that's what I would want. I'm
Yeah,
already preparing for the events that I'm going to, so that I can cultivate my own relationships and career. I'm already planning now for months and months and months away, like who I'm going to meet with, what I'm going to do when I'm there. And that's great. I think that's a good thing for all of us.
yeah. It
So
makes me think of the early days of Twitter when I met you. Twitter was a
I know
small thing. It wasn't this huge global
it
thing.
was.
And look at the relationships that we made. I mean, this was 2009, 2010, even a little bit before that. Those have lasted the test of time. And to me, I still look at some of these relationships as the most valuable things that have contributed to my career, whether it's
Yeah,
financially or just connections and knowing people, you know what I mean? That to me is so
absolutely,
much more valuable
absolutely.
than
Yeah.
anything else I'm seeing right now on social.
Well, I've known you over 10 years, and it's because,
Yeah,
I mean, like our the Twitter connections and all of that, like, and what do? They drove us to want to be in the same place at the same time and meet and do all of these cool meetup type of things and events and stuff in person. It drove those relationships to grow. And because of that, they're stronger, there's trust there. And I think, that is encouraging. And I wish that I wish people could just like grasp how that works. It's not either or, but it's
right.
actually just building towards everybody kind of naturally wants to come together. So just a really quick thing. I know that we're over our time, but like, is the metaverse conversation and having meetings in the metaverse, is this reminding you of Second Life and like the early days of like moving the
Yeah,
avatar around? It's so weird to me. It's so funny because that was
I
also,
know.
yeah.
I wonder, actually, it's an interesting conversation. Are you seeing a lot of people in associations talking about the metaverse for
Yeah, well, I'm
replacing?
seeing
Are
people
you?
start to they're talking about it. There are fewer who are actually doing it, but there are more and more saying, "Yes, we had a meeting in the metaverse." And I'm like, "Yeah, I remember Second Life. Like I remember, but the only difference was I didn't have my Oculus headset, right?
Right,
But but
exactly.
like but like yeah, as far as moving your avatar around and meeting in these places, and I just, I know Elon Musk says that it's like a marketing gimmick, and I was kind of in the mindset of thinking kind of like that anyway, because it's like, well, what your avatar is meeting in space. But
Yeah,
then I was talking to someone who talked about how their kids are like, they're like, people are coming over, and then the guys all move into different rooms and put on their Oculus headsets, and they all hang out and play these games in different rooms, and then they get together and eat and they hang out together, and then they separate to go back into their spaces, and they
gosh.
love it, they're having a great time. And I thought, you know I don't know if
Yeah.
it's taking off and people are, and it's working and they get that time together, plus they get to interact in the metaverse. It doesn't seem that different from meeting in Twitter and wanting to get together and eat either. So I don't know.
I think that's the key, though, is the both things, having the
Yeah,
ability to meet in person and have that experience.
it is.
That's very
It's a
interesting.
perfect example. These kids still want to get together and eat their pizza, right? They still want to
Right.
hang
Yeah.
out. It's just like this other stuff is happening elsewhere.
Yeah. Other
So,
cool stuff to see.
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time catching up. I always feel like I learn a lot from you. I'm starting to already think of some Texie Talk stuff we need to be doing and other things with clients. So this is
Yay.
the benefit of just being able to chat with other great people, people who really know what they're talking about in the industry. So thank you for your time. And thank you to those who are watching. I saw Maya and Abby are watching and others. We love seeing your comments and just I know that this is time for everyone. Everyone's busy. There's a lot going on in the world. I think at some point in this chat, we probably were up against Joe Biden talking about,
Oh
US
my gosh.
banning oil imports or something. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
And we'll have to just catch up very soon again.
we will. Thank you,
Yeah.
my friend.
Thank you. Hopefully I'll see you in person very soon.
I hope so. I hope that happens. We need to
Yeah.
make that happen.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We'll be back next Tuesday for another episode of the Event Hustler Show. Definitely check out Kiki and all the great stuff that she's doing on LinkedIn with Association Chat. We'll make sure to put some links in our bio here in our follow up. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Have a great day.
All right.